in with Real Progressives, my 8 o'clock regular scheduled broadcast. I'm going to be revisiting the drug war, talking about, the drug war, the opiate epidemic, and how we got to this place and how we're going to get through this, all right? So when we think about the drug war, again, like guns, Americans have a tendency to focus on superficial feel-good policy that does nothing to correct the underlying issues, the underlying systemic problems that cause the underlying systemic issues that cause the problems to begin with. So when we talk about drugs, we gotta go back to the beginning of human history, with drugs, and we got to go back to the beginning of the drug war, how drug law came to be. So first, with human history, from the beginning, humans have always looked for ways to achieve altered states of consciousness. And they found ways in the natural world all around them with drugs to achieve these altered states of consciousness. Now, there's a lot of people, scientists and others, that think this is why and how we evolved into what we are today. Drugs gave people a way to achieve these altered states of consciousness, which would allow them to focus, to look at problems outside the box, and to have more abstract thinking. And so they were able to think about things in a different way, and that helped our evolution. So drugs can be life-saving. Drugs can save lives. Drugs can kill lives. Drugs can kill, just like anything. Drugs, though, are an inanimate object. Okay, they're not good or bad until the person using them decides how they're going to use it. So we have to make sure we remember that. The turn of the century, everything was pretty much legal. All right, Coca-Cola had cocaine in it. We had things like Brompton's cocktail. There was horse and buggy to go around to all the little towns in America, and they sold all these little tonics and all these little things that a lot of Americans enjoyed. And we did have addiction problems. But America couldn't criminalize nature and peaceful behavior back then, because Americans back then were very protective of our rights. And even if they didn't know what the right was, if they saw the government was trying to take something from them, they would have been instinctively against it. They would have revolted. So our government had to do something else. And government ended up dealing with this problem by passing labeling laws. Once people understood what they were ingesting was dangerous and addictive, people started to make better decisions on their own. And it wasn't until, nobody wants to be addicted. So, that education goes a long way in helping addiction issues. But now later on, there was a huge propaganda campaign, carried out by 3 people, really. William Randolph Hearst, who was a media mogul, Harry Anslinger, who was from the Department of Justice, and DuPont, representing healthcare. So these 3 represented the industry's interests. And industry wanted drugs illegal to maximize corporate profits and for control of people. And so now people were getting, every time they would read the newspaper, they were getting these stories about, coke-crazed Negroes that were going to rape all the white women. And I actually, when I was looking some of this stuff up, there was a news article where a police officer was saying that they needed bigger caliber bullets. And I think they had 38 caliber, and they said that he shot a black guy, a coke-crazed Negro, 5 times and still couldn't bring him down, and he was requesting bigger slugs, 45 caliber slugs. I mean, that's just how crazy it was. This is all propaganda to get people to have a negative association of drugs. They wanted people to think of minorities when they thought of drugs. We rebranded hemp as marijuana, so people would think of Mexicans when they thought of drugs. And this effective. You know, people love to have a scapegoat. So, you know, when they thought, when they viewed it as, oh, well, you know, these laws will only hurt, you know, immigrants and minorities, then they were okay with it. You know, and by, I think it was 1933, we got our first major nationalized federal guidelines for narcotics. And now we got to remember that at least from the 50s, America has been in proxy wars all over the world against Russia and Red China. All right, so America would fund, arm, and give logistic support to crazy right-wing fundamentalist groups to take down left-wing communism. All right, and let's be clear, communism isn't some horrible system or radical system. I know that's what we were taught in America, but the truth of the matter is communism is just about decentralized worker control. There's nothing radical about that. There's something radical about capitalism that gives control to 1.1% of the population. You know, that's radical. But anyway, getting back to it, you know, we would empower these right-wing movements all over the world, and we would get tons of unintended consequences from these proxy wars. But, you know, we also did deliberate things. The CIA and the government would turn a blind eye to these right-wing groups when they need to raise money. They would, you know, turn a blind eye to humanitarian rights violations and to drug trafficking because these right-wing groups needed to raise money, and our Congress wouldn't approve the money because the American people wouldn't approve of our involvement in these conflicts in the first place. So we had to, you know, they had to fund these wars covertly. And so, you know, they would turn a blind eye to drug trafficking, and they would also facilitate it, you know, in many different times. In the war in South America, and the Contras, and Vietnam, the unspoken war in Cambodia, you know, over and over and over again we see this happen. And America would be flooded with illegal drugs because of this. Now, at the same time we were allowing these drugs to get here, we're also domestically inflicting police terror in the form of the drug war. You know, cops legally rape, rob, and kill people over evil flowers, all in the name of corporate profits. Talk about Sharia law. Now, when I say that, you know, I'm not exaggerating. You know, if a cop thinks you have a flower inside you, if they think you got weed or something inside you, they could take you to the hospital and have you medically raped for hours. There was a young girl in my town, Newcastle, Pennsylvania, and this is exactly what they did to her. They saw her with her boyfriend. He was a black guy. They pulled them over. They took her in, and they searched her, gave her cavity searches over and over again, put her through the x-ray machine. They saw she had nothing in her. It wasn't about drugs. They wanted to torture this girl so that she would give up information. They thought that her black boyfriend was a drug dealer. So, you know, as they're doing these humiliating procedures, there was cops all through the room. The DA was in this girl's ear saying, you know, all this can be over if you just simply give up, you know, your dealer, give us the information. She was crying, and she said, I don't know what you want. You know, what do you want from me? And finally, after 5 hours, they released her, and she had vaginal tearing. That's how bad it was. She brought a federal suit, and they threw it out. They said that if a cop thinks you got a flower in you, this is perfectly legal. So it's not an exaggeration. You know, if cops can use civil asset forfeiture to take your house, seize your bank accounts, without even charging you with a crime, so they can rob you over flowers. All right, people die over weed warrants all the time, so people are being killed over flowers. All right, this isn't exaggeration. This is why people say all cops are bad. All right. It's just a statement of fact. If you swear allegiance to an organization that carries out inhumane, unjust, brutal law, you can't be good. You may be a good person in your personal life, but once you put on that uniform, you're a state-sponsored terrorist. That's just a fact. That's a statement of fact. I mean, you don't think that I could, you know, pledge support to ISIS and still be good. We don't say, oh, well, there's some good people in ISIS and some bad people in ISIS. No, if you pledge support to a murderous organization, you can't be good. It's the same thing with cops. All right? Good people do horrible things when they're ordered to do so by a perceived authority. So if you look up the Stanford experiments, or, you know, they coined this behavior, the Lucifer effect, you know, and that's exactly what it is. It's about how good people do horrible things when they're ordered to do so by a perceived authority. And they call that the Lucifer effect, you know. Good people, you know, become cops. You know, they do horrible things, cops or military. They do horrible things, especially when it's ordered by, you know, country, crown or country. So look it up, check that out. But yeah, it's all about the money, you know. Police departments are underfunded all over the nation, and this forces them to engage in policing for profit, all right, just to stay operational. So, you know, drug law really has nothing to do with public safety. You know, we also have to remember just about every illegal drug has a legal synthetic counterpart on the for-profit healthcare side. You know, remember I was telling you about the propaganda campaign with DuPont? This is why. You know, this is why industry wanted drugs illegal. Drugs cut into corporate profits across the board. From, you know, the for-profit healthcare side, they cut into those profits. They cut into oil profits, fuel profits, textile profits, concrete profits, food profits. They cut into so many different profits. And this is the main reason why industry, you know, banded together and engaged in this propaganda war to begin with. You know, again, the drug war also allows, it gives local governments the ability to fund themselves to stay operational. So drug law really has nothing to do with public safety. You know, the big pushback we get is, oh, well, demand will explode. If we legalize drugs today, everybody will be out using tomorrow. Demand will explode. But the reality is, if we legalize drugs today, we wouldn't see many more people addicted tomorrow. The same people that used yesterday will use tomorrow. The only difference is they won't be leaving dirty needles all through your community. They won't be robbing your community. You know, there will be government regulation and government oversight. Government will have a big measure of control. All right, that's the only difference. You know, if government controls people's drugs, you know, that's a much better way to control addiction and drugs than pushing it into the shadows of the back alleys. You know, government has no control over it then. You know, this is just simple common sense. So, you know, we need to engage in harm reduction instead of, you know, this counterproductive prohibition. You know, if I want to be but we got to remember, if I want to be a junkie or I want to be a drunk, that's my right as an American. You know, the pursuit of happiness, how I see it. As long as my actions don't violate the rights of the next person or violate society, the general welfare, that is my right. You know, we don't tell people that, you know, we always look at drug addiction differently. Like people, if you have Hep C and you're an IV user, you know, you can't even get a liver. They'll tell you, no, what's the point? You know, what's the point? But we don't tell diabetes patients they can't have a kidney, you know, because they eat too much sugar. We don't tell obese patients they can't have a heart because they eat wrong. You know, it's the same thing. Addiction is a brain disease. Yeah, it's brought on by a choice, but many diseases are brought on by a choice, like diabetes or obesity. Obesity costs America more than all drugs combined. All right, yet we're not going to go make Burger King illegal. You know what I mean? We're not gonna make you know, trans fat illegal. Come on, this is insanity. Now, if someone is shown to be an addict and they're being a problem for society, they're violating people's rights, they're disruptive, they're hurting the general welfare, then there's laws on the books to deal with that. And they should also be made to have to go to a clinic to get their drugs. You know, So that's, that's what you do. And there, at that clinic, we also need to have resources available to get clean. We need real rehabs, not these for-profit shitholes, that'll just give you cheap drugs, cheap food, and it's all about profit. No, we need real rehabs, like these $100,000 rehabs for the rich and famous who focus on, mind, body, and soul. They have massage parlors in the rehab. They have all good food, good beds, good therapists. They get down into some real psychotherapy. But at the same time, we got to make sure that we deal with the systemic factors, because no matter how many tools you give somebody, if they get out of rehab and they still can't, have a decent life, if they have to work a full-time job and still can't make ends meet, so they're going to have to go back to the black market just to survive. All right, that's a recipe for disaster. So we have to think about these things. So let's, so we need nationalized health care for all. That's mandatory. All right, but let's think about this for a minute. First, we empowered the Taliban in a proxy war against Red Russia. All right, and the Taliban, as we all know, are right-wing religious fundamentalists. They didn't allow farmers in Afghanistan to grow poppy. In fact, the Taliban paid subsidies to farmers to grow food instead of poppy. So anyway, we won our proxy war in the Taliban. We pushed the Russians out. And then the Taliban turned their attention to us in the West. 9/11 happened. We went into Afghanistan, kicked the Taliban's butt, put them on the run, and we empowered the local warlords who dealt and grew poppy. Surprise, surprise. And we made the Afghanistan president Mohammed Karzai. His brother is one of the biggest heroin producers and distributors in the region. So this is, it always happens like this. And, so now with the Taliban rule gone and U.S. support, Afghanistan opium production skyrockets. Afghanistan supplying 90% of the world with really good, really cheap heroin. All right, now at the same time, we're domestically still inflicting police terror with the drug war. And we now are cracking down on the legal supply of opiates. So now you get people who can't get the meds that they need. And their community is now flooded with really good, really cheap heroin. So what's happening is we're forced onto the black market to play doctor for ourselves just to get the medicines we need to survive. All right? And on the black market, again, there's no medical oversight. There's no government regulation. There's no care about addiction. There's no care about kids or society. The black market is pure capitalism. Profit is the driver. So of course you end up with overdose clusters. Of course we end up with an opioid epidemic. This is how our for-profit imperialism is counterproductive. This is why police terror and the drug war is counterproductive. Another one is economic terror. It's also counterproductive, as our government targets unemployment, 5% unemployment. We make sure 5% of the working class can't find a job. So that's systemic, intentional poverty. All right? That isn't how you get civil society. That feeds into addiction. All right? That's what causes our society to be a violent, dog-eat-dog, dysfunctional society. And that's what feeds the conditions that make addiction a problem. So, obviously we can't do that. We can't be the biggest state sponsor of terrorism around the world without blowback. It's impossible. We can't inflict economic and police terror on society without radicalizing our society. We have to stop criminalizing nature and peaceful behavior. Okay? Government needs to fully fund the public purpose. All right? Government can create dollars at will to fully fund all public purpose programs. That's the purpose of our Constitution. That's why we have a government. The Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, it mandates Congress mandates Congress to mint and tax to provide for the general welfare of society. So, when we look at Rat Park, for instance, it's a study about rats, all right? And it may sound funny, and people may say, well, what's that got to do with humans? Well, rats are social creatures. Humans are social creatures. So at a fundamental level, there's some similarities, all right? But what they found was, I'm going to break it down to the bottom line. What they found was, rats that were, the rats would willingly go through detox to get into the free society. All right, the rats that were in solitary confinement and miserable would want to anesthetize themselves. They would use drugs, but then they would willingly go through detox to get back into the society. It's the same way for humans. When humans feel that their life is a cage and, there's no hope and there's no happiness, addiction becomes a problem. It's simple logic. When people think that, when people are happy and they have hope for a better future, then addiction people aren't susceptible to addiction to begin with. So, we have to work on the systemic factors, the root factors that cause the addiction. Why are so many people feeling hopeless in society? Why are so many people feeling angry and radicalized in society? Maybe it has something to do with with our government inflicting economic and police terror on us. Maybe it has something to do with our for-profit imperialism around the world. I don't know. Call me crazy. But nobody wants to be addicted. Maybe you get hurt and become dependent on pain pills. Then your doctor cuts you off. All right, so all of a sudden you find yourself needing to play doctor on the black market just to survive. But you don't have no doctor supervision, no medical oversight, so it's just you. So pretty soon you start to rationalize, and you say, well, I got this pain, so I have a legitimate need, I could do a little bit more. Before you know it, you got a full-blown addiction problem. So, and you live life in hell. Nobody wants that. Nobody sets out to be an addict. That's nobody's goal. Okay, how you deal with this stuff is with harm reduction. All right, making laws inflicting more economic and police terror isn't how you help the addiction problem in America. So we got how do you fight systemic hopelessness? All right, you fight it with a federal job guarantee. Okay, if people have a federally guaranteed living wage job, if they're rebuilding their own community, that helps in so many ways to give people hope, to give people a feeling of camaraderie with their community, to give people purpose. That's how you combat addiction, not with police terror and economic terror. That's only going to make the matter exponentially worse. So, this stuff isn't hard. Now, I'm going to explain the federal job guarantee real quick for, just in case I'm pretty sure everybody on Real Progressives knows about the federal job guarantee. But for people maybe in my hometown who don't understand the implications and how this would revolutionize society, I'll go ahead and I'll repeat it. The federal job guarantee is the revolutionary progressive keystone program from which all other programs will flow. From full employment, we have a democratic means of production to, from there we would have labor for single-payer health care, for nationalized education, kindergarten through college, for green sustainable energy. All these things raise our standard of living and combat the conditions that make addiction a problem. But not just that, it gives people power back. It gives people leverage. The average person will have leverage, all right? The federal job guarantee makes the minimum wage the federal living wage without a mandate to the private sector. Either the private sector beat the federal living wage or they can't attract the labor workforce. So this is another big way to attack the addiction problem. If you working a full-time job and you can't make ends meet, you know, you're in trouble. There's a problem there. You're either going to become radicalized and want to hurt people, or you're going to, you know, anesthetize yourself to deal with the pain. And you're going to have to work in the black market to make ends meet. You know, that's not a good recipe for that's not how you get civil society. So, also though, the federal job guarantee restores democracy. It fights gerrymandering. It fights local corruption. It fights police terror, racial discrimination, sexual discrimination. It does all of this with extreme mobility. You get a city like Flint, Michigan, who allows their police to terrorize their people. They allow their infrastructure to become neglected to the point where it's poisoning everybody. You know, people could simply get up and leave and go to a community that really does value their people. They can do that knowing they have a federally guaranteed living wage job waiting for them wherever they go. What that does to the substandard city, they lose their ability, they lose their tax base, and with it they lose their ability to operate, because local and state governments really are revenue constrained, unlike our federal government, who never needs revenue or profit. But, you know, and it doesn't stop there. The federal job guarantee even fights for-profit imperialism. You know, when people, you know, it destroys the military's ability to recruit. It destroys the military's employer of last resort status. You know, the military loses their leverage to recruit people all over the place. Well, we would no longer be the precarious class anymore. All right, people would be able to stay home and, you know, get a guaranteed living wage job rebuilding their own community. So it would devastate our military's ability to recruit, and with that, they would have to, you know, abandon their goals of empire, or that, you know, they would have to truly defend our nation's sovereignty and truly defend our people's rights from all, from everybody, from all enemies, foreign and domestic. You know, from rogue nations to our domestic capitalist class. This would be the only way to get enough people to feel patriotic enough to join the military to begin with. So this is how you combat systemic hopelessness. This is how you combat radicalization. You know, you gotta. Our government needs to invest in society. Our government needs to invest in the people. That's the whole thing. But let's see if we can find any comments here that I can comment on. Oh yeah, so again, let's back step a minute, and I want to clearly make sure we all understand what we're doing here. All right, so first we cut the social safety net. We cut things like mental health. We cut things like education. We cut things like health care. All right, we privatize it. We deregulate it. We teach our kids from birth to put profit over people and society. All right, and we all do this. You know, every time our kids see an empty house and around the corner they see an empty foreclosed house, they're being taught to put profit over people in society. Every time they see people die of preventable, treatable illness but for lack of cash, they're being taught to put profit over people in society. Every time they see a jobless person, while they see our communities crumbling, you know, starved of human resources, starved of infrastructure, they're being taught to put profit over people in society. So then, you know, we drug our kids with for-profit medicines like Adderall. All right, that's basically cocaine. Okay, so how could this end up any? And this goes into the gun issue too. You know, how could this end up any better? You know, how could anybody grow up on these conditions, you know, and not have a disrespect for human life? Not be indifferent to human suffering. You know, I mean, people do. You know, I grew up in this society, and, you know, I hate human suffering, and I feel empathy, you know, but that, I'm not saying we all are radicalized and we're all indifferent, but enough people are to make big problems in society, and that's the main thing. So, you know, that's why we have these problems. It isn't the drugs, it isn't the guns, it's society. You know, if you kick a dog every day, you beat it and you're mean to it, you feed it gunpowder, that dog's going to be crazy. And it's not the dog's fault. It's the systemic factors that dog was forced to live under. All right? So we have to change the systemic factors. We can destroy every gun in society. And, the same, if we still allow our government to radicalize society, the bloodshed will continue. I mean, it's that simple. We can inflict as much economic and police terror as we want. Addiction is going to get worse and worse and worse. That's not going to help. The answers are very simple. And we as Americans, it seems like we don't like to look at the root causes. We like to lie to ourselves. We like to sleep easy at night. There's a joke. There's a meme I often share. It's on my profile, as a matter of fact. And it talks about how in America we have this joke that the French are cowards. But that joke doesn't exist outside of America. Outside of America, we're the joke. Us Americans give up our rights for fear of communism, for fear of race, for fear of drugs, for fear of revolution. All right? And so, we're the joke. And we need to rise up and stand together in solidarity to force our government to satisfy its constitutional mandate to the general welfare, first and foremost. That's not radical, folks. It's radical for our socially owned government to work for the private purpose of capital at society's expense. That's fascism. And that is radical. Just so everyone's clear, we are guaranteed government for, of, and by the people. All right, that's democratically, socially owned government for the general welfare. That's socialism. It's baked right into the Constitution before socialism was even a word. All right, capitalism only exists in the private sector, and government owns the private sector with its ability to impose tax and be the monopoly issuer of the only tax credit, dollars. So, nobody even owns property in America. It's just like communist China. All right, we all rent. We all pay tax. All right, the only free market is the black market. All right, even the dollars in your pockets belong to the government. We're only allowed to spend those dollars legally on the government-regulated market, buying government-regulated goods and services. Government owns everything. Government is a supreme authority. Government is charged to maintain our general welfare. That's their purpose. Okay? Anything else is radical by definition. So, let's see. Kathy says we need federal money put into testing DNA markers for predisposition to addiction. Yeah, definitely. I think though, I think more of that gets made. I'm not really sure about the science behind that. In families that I see addiction all around me. And in my family in particular, I'm an addict, okay? But I'm the only one. I got three brothers. All my brothers and sisters, they may have dabbled here and there, but there's no other addicts besides me. My cousin is an addict. My aunt, other people in my family. I call my cousin my sister, but she's not. She's my cousin. But what I'm saying is, if it was genetically predisposed, then we would see, more families being the whole family being addicted instead of just one brother or one sister or one family member. So I'm not sure. I think every human being has a predisposition to drugs. We all do, and anybody could be susceptible. If you feel hopeless enough and you feel like nothing, then you could be susceptible to drugs. Even rich people from all walks of life, they're all susceptible to addiction. And it doesn't mean weakness. It's a brain disease. Once you alter the chemistry in your brain, it's like it becomes a brain disease. Your brain is used to getting these chemicals artificially. And then once you stop taking those chemicals, your brain forgets how to produce those same chemicals naturally. So you go through withdrawal. It's an actual brain disease. And just because people start the disease by themselves doesn't mean it's not a disease. You could get cancer from smoking cigarettes. You get obesity from eating. There's all kinds of stuff that you bring on yourself, but it's still a disease. Addiction is still a disease. It's a brain disease. And it's, I like to tell this story to demonstrate how powerful the brain is. There was a person, lost at sea, and they were in a life raft. And they had to survive at sea for, I think it was like a couple months. And the guy would fish off the side of it, and he would catch these fish. And he would first eat the best pieces, all the white meat. But very quickly, he started finding himself, craving the nastiest bits of the fish, the eyes, the liver, this, that, the other thing, and he didn't understand why. And in his brain, these nasty bits would taste like chocolate cake. They were the best thing in the world. Well, here we find out this was the brain's way of subconsciously staying alive. He needed the fish's eyes for fresh water. He needed the fish's liver for, vitamin or for iron or whatever, and all these different parts. And the brain subconsciously knew this stuff. That's how powerful the brain is. See, addiction overtakes that same process. Addiction takes the same, it overtakes the same pleasure centers of the brain that are used when you're having sex or when you're eating or anything. And that's why addiction is so strong. That's why some people will choose drugs over food. And there's been studies where rats will choose electric shock to get drugs. They'll choose drugs over food. They'll choose drugs over sex. And I've seen people do all that. No shit. So, addiction is a very strong thing. But it's mostly, brought about by systemic factors. Okay? And we could change those. I'm trying to find some good comments to comment on. People are always saying how crazy I am when I talk about this. And I want to talk about some of the pushback we get. So if anybody out there thinks that any part of what I said is wrong, type a comment so we could discuss it. I don't really see anything, so I think I'm going to end it there. I think I got everything this time. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Make sure you tune in to Dr. Joe directly after this. Kathy says she loves the federal job guarantee. Her sister loved to work before she got a bad hip that put her in a wheelchair. She ran the VA greenhouse program in Providence, Rhode Island. It was a beautiful program for the vets. Absolutely. There's so many jobs that a federal job guarantee can take care of. So much work right now that gets done free of charge. People volunteer to help others. Our communities are starved of human resources. They're starved of infrastructure. All right, there's absolutely no reason why we should have, unemployment just lying around. We have untapped productive capacity. That's artificial scarcity. That's austerity, pointless austerity that kills just like bullets. All right? So, that's what makes the systemic issues of addiction. That's what makes the systemic issues of radicalization. That's how we get all this violence and all this dysfunction in our society. When you treat people like enemy combatants, you cannot be surprised when they respond like insurgents. It's simple logic. All right, again, go back to the dog. You beat a dog every day, you feed it gunpowder, the dog will be crazy. It's not the dog's fault. It's the systemic issues that dog was forced to live under. So, again, guys, just think about these things. Don't too many people gravitate toward these feel-good policy prescriptions that do nothing to change the underlying systemic factors that cause the problems to begin with. All right, whether it's drugs, guns, imperialism, whatever it is, we have to start having these uncomfortable conversations and speaking the truth. I don't see this stuff on news anywhere. When I watch the mainstream right now, I see a bunch of stuff about Russia and Donald Trump that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's the same regardless who's in office. Do they talk about the real issues? They might talk about the drug war, the opioid epidemic. They might talk about school shootings, but they never, ever highlight the actual root causes. They never talk about the systemic factors All right, they talk about guns being the problem. They want to talk about the tool people use to go crazy with, instead of why so many go crazy to begin with. They want to talk about drugs being bad, instead of why all these people all of a sudden are on the black market to begin with. Why so many people feel hopeless to begin with. Why so many people feel desperate to begin with. Why so many people have to survive in the alternative economy to begin with, in the black market. You know, these are the issues that real progressives focus on, because all problems in society are rooted in economics, and they all have their macroeconomic remedy. Now, I'm not saying that these problems will go away completely, but they would be much, much better if the right macroeconomic policy was applied. So, that's all I got, guys. Thanks for tuning in. You've been great. Peace.